In 1848, a British court made a ruling that changed the entire financial world forever. The judge stated clearly that when you deposit money with a banker, that money becomes the banker's money, not yours, theirs. Legally, completely, and permanently, the moment it crosses into your account. That ruling has never been overturned and never reformed, never successfully challenged in any major court anywhere in the world. And right now, in 2026, every dollar, every pound, every euro sitting in your bank account is still governed by that exact principle. Here is what that means for you personally. The number you see when you log into your banking app is not a record of what you own. It is a record of what a bank owes you. And if that bank cannot pay, for any reason, you are not a victim of theft. You are an unsecured creditor standing at the back of a very long line. This system was not broken into this state. It was not corrupted gradually over time. It was built this way, on purpose, from the very beginning. And by the end of this video, I'm going to show you exactly what the people who knew this did differently, because that is the only part of this story that actually puts you ahead. In this video, I'm going to prove all of it, with real laws, real cases, and one event that already happened to ordinary people in a Western country that your government studied carefully, adopted, and has quietly prepared to use again. By the end of this video, you will understand the financial system better than 99% of the people living inside it. And that gap between what you know and what most people assume is exactly where wealth is either protected or destroyed. Let's start with the legal foundation, because until you understand this, nothing else makes sense. When you deposit money into a bank, most people imagine the bank as a vault. Your money goes in and it sits there and waits. The bank is just the custodian, holding your property safely until you want it back. That is not what happens. The moment your money crosses into that account, a legal transformation takes place instantly. The cash becomes the bank's asset and their property. What you receive in return is not money. It is a number on a screen representing a promise that the bank will pay you back when you ask. That promise has a legal name, a demand deposit. And a promise is not the same as possession. This was settled in English law in 1848 in a case called Foley versus Hill. The judge's ruling was not ambiguous. The money deposited with a banker becomes the banker's money. The depositor becomes a creditor, and the bank becomes a debtor. You are not a customer with property in storage. You are a lender, and the bank is your borrower. Now, here is where it gets structural. Fractional reserve banking, the system underpinning every bank in the modern world, only functions because of this legal principle. Banks are permitted to lend out the vast majority of what you deposit, keeping only a small fraction in reserve. In the United States, reserve requirements were cut to zero in March 2020. Zero. Banks are not legally required to hold a single dollar of your deposit in reserve. This is not a glitch. This is the design. It means that at any given moment, if more than a small percentage of depositors tried to withdraw simultaneously, the money simply would not be there. Now, you might say, that is why we have deposit insurance. The FDIC in the U.S. covers up to $250,000, so the system has a safety net. Here is the safety net. The FDIC Insurance Fund currently holds approximately $125 billion. American banks hold over $17 trillion in deposits. That is a coverage ratio of less than 1%. If 3 or 4 large banks failed simultaneously, the fund would be exhausted within hours. And who backs the FDIC if that happens? Theoretically, the U.S. government, the same government currently carrying $34 trillion in debt. So the safety net is a promise, backed by a promise and issued by an institution that is itself deeply insolvent by any conventional accounting standard. The system is working exactly as it was designed. It just was not designed to protect you. Now, here is what most people genuinely do not know. This is not theoretical and already happened, in living memory, in a Western country, to ordinary people with ordinary savings accounts. The year was 2013. The place was Cyprus. Cyprus had a banking crisis. Two of its largest banks were insolvent, and the European Union and the IMF agreed to provide a rescue, but with one condition that stunned the world. Depositors would pay for it. Anyone with over 100,000 euros in a Cypriot bank had a percentage of their savings forcibly converted into bank shares, shares that were, for most practical purposes, worthless. Overnight, people lost 40, 50, even 60% of everything above the insured threshold. There were no warnings, no announcements. One Friday, everything was normal. That weekend, the bank simply did not open. ATMs were capped at 100 euros per day, and people who had spent 30 years building their savings watched numbers on a screen get quietly revised downward by forces entirely outside their control. One Cypriot businessman, a building contractor named Andreas, who had saved his entire working life, had 400,000 euros across two accounts. He lost over half of it in a single weekend, and he never recovered financially. He was not unusual. He was the average story of that crisis, multiplied across an entire country. This was not theft. It was not illegal. It had a formal name: a bail-in. A mechanism specifically designed to make depositors absorb bank losses rather than taxpayers. And here is the detail that changes everything. After Cyprus, the G20 nations, which includes the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union, Canada, and Australia, formally adopted bail-in frameworks as the preferred tool for handling future banking crises. In the United States, this is embedded in the Dodd-Frank Act. In Europe, it is the Bank Recovery and Resolution Directive. These laws explicitly empower regulators to convert your deposits into equity, meaning your savings become worthless bank stock during a systemic crisis. This is not a hypothetical. This is written law, agreed upon and signed by every major government on Earth. Your government did not protect you from Cyprus. It studied Cyprus, and then it built the same mechanism into your financial system. The question is no longer whether this framework exists, because it does. The only question is what conditions would activate it, and whether those conditions are forming right now. Three things are happening simultaneously in 2026 that have never converged like this before. Individually, each one is serious. Together, they form something the financial system has no clean answer for. The first is commercial real estate. Over $1.5 trillion in commercial real estate loans are maturing between 2024 and 2026. Office buildings, retail spaces, regional malls, properties that lost 30, 40, 50% of their value after remote work became permanent. These loans sit primarily on the books of small and mid-sized regional banks, not the giants on Wall Street, the bank in your town, the one where ordinary people keep their savings. Consider what this looks like at street level. A regional bank in the Midwest holds a loan on a downtown office tower that was valued at $80 million in 2019. Today, that building is 30% occupied. Its market value has dropped to $40 million. The loan comes due this year. The developer cannot refinance. The bank is now holding a $40 million loss on a single asset, and it has dozens more just like it. When those loans go bad, the bank absorbs the losses directly. The industry has been buying time with a strategy called extend and pretend. Roll the loan forward, avoid marking the loss, hope the market recovers. But extend and pretend has a deadline, and that deadline is now. The second is the bond market. When interest rates rise, the value of existing bonds falls. This is financial gravity, as reliable and unavoidable as any law in economics. Between 2022 and 2024, the Federal Reserve raised rates at the fastest pace in 40 years. Banks that were holding long-term government bonds, the single safest asset class in the world, suddenly found themselves sitting on catastrophic unrealized losses. This is precisely what destroyed Silicon Valley Bank in 2023. Not fraud and not reckless speculation. They bought government bonds and rates moved against them. When depositors understood what was happening and rushed for the exits, the second largest bank failure in American history unfolded in 48 hours. Silicon Valley Bank was not an anomaly. At the peak of the rate crisis, American banks collectively held over $600 billion in unrealized bond losses. Most of that has not been resolved. It has been extended, reclassified, and sheltered inside accounting rules that allow banks to avoid reporting losses until they are forced to sell. The losses are real. They simply have not been made visible yet. The third is political reality. After 2008, governments used public money to save the financial system. The backlash was enormous, permanent, and career-ending for everyone associated with it. The word bailout became radioactive. No elected official in any major democracy today can openly advocate for saving banks with taxpayer money and expect to survive the political consequences. Which means the next time a major institution faces collapse, and given the first 2 points, that is a matter of when rather than if, the bail-in is not just legally available, it is the only politically survivable option. Your deposits are not savings sitting safely in a vault. In the architecture of the modern financial system, they are the buffer, the last line of absorption between institutional failure and public accountability. If you have found this useful so far, and I think what's coming in the next section is the most important part, make sure you subscribe now so you don't miss what we cover next. Because this channel exists specifically to give you the framework that most financial content refuses to provide. Now, let's talk about what the people who knew this actually did differently. Every financial crisis in recorded history produces the same split. There is always a group of people who understood what was coming, and there is always a much larger group who trusted that the system would protect them. The difference between those two groups was never intelligence or income. It was information, and, more specifically, a framework for reading what the information actually meant. In Cyprus in 2013, depositors with connections inside the banking system began moving money out of Cypriot banks weeks before the bail-in was announced. By the time ordinary account holders woke up that Monday morning to find their savings frozen and ATMs capped, the sophisticated money was already gone. The information had been available. Most people simply did not have the tools to act on it. In Germany, during the hyperinflation of the 1920s, the government was printing money so fast that workers were paid twice a day so they could spend their wages before the value collapsed by afternoon. The people who survived with their wealth intact were not the ones who worked harder or saved more diligently. They were the ones who understood that paper money was being debased and moved into things the government could not print: land, foreign currency, productive assets, hard goods. The warning signs were visible for years before the collapse. Most people trusted the system until it was too late. In 2008, the investors who saw the mortgage crisis coming did not just protect themselves. They positioned correctly and profited enormously, because they understood the structural weakness embedded in the system months before the consensus caught up. When the crash came, they were ready. Not because they were smarter, but because they were asking different questions. The pattern never changes. The information exists before the crisis. The signals are visible before the collapse. But reading them requires a framework that most people are never given. Because a population that genuinely understands how the financial system works is a population that behaves very differently within it. And here is the thing that every single one of those historical examples has in common. The people who navigated those crises successfully did not do it by predicting the future. They did it by understanding the present. They looked at the system clearly, without the comfortable assumptions most people carry, and they made decisions based on what was actually true, rather than what they had been told to believe. That is not a special skill. That is not reserved for the wealthy or the connected. It is simply a matter of having the right information at the right time. That is the only thing this channel is trying to build, not fear and not paranoia, not a prediction of collapse, a framework. Because here is the truth that history proves over and over again. You do not need to predict a crisis to be protected from one. You just need to understand the system clearly enough to see when it is moving against you. And once you have that understanding, you are no longer a passive participant hoping the system treats you fairly. You become someone who can read it, navigate it, and make decisions from a position of clarity rather than assumption. That shift, from passive to informed, is the only edge that has ever mattered. So let's return to where we started. In 1848, a court ruled that your money becomes the bank's money the moment you deposit it. That ruling still stands. The bail-in framework, the legal mechanism to convert your savings into worthless bank equity during a crisis, exists in every major Western economy. That is written law. Commercial real estate is collapsing on regional bank balance sheets. $600 billion in bond losses remain unreported, and the political system has made public bailouts impossible. The bail-in is the only tool left. Most people have no idea any of this exists. So I want to leave you with one question. The same question that has separated, in every financial crisis in history, the people who navigated it successfully from the people who were consumed by it. Do you understand the system well enough to know when it is moving against you? If the answer is no, that is exactly what this channel exists to change. One video at a time. And if this gave you something most financial content refuses to give you, an honest look at how the system actually works rather than how we are told it works, then subscribe. Because what I covered today is one piece of a much larger picture. The next piece is the one most people find hardest to believe, because it means this system was never broken. It was built this way, on purpose.